In Lochdubh, a letter may travel slowly, but it should never arrive from tomorrow. In a Highland village, the post carries more than bills and birthday cards. A familiar hand knows which cottage is empty, who is waiting for hospital news, and which envelope ought to be delivered without comment. So when Lochdubh's postal counter was threatened with losing its local sorting service, the village reacted with the quiet fury reserved for useful things being taken away. Then, several letters reached the wrong hands. At first, it seemed like carelessness. Yet Hamish Macbeth soon noticed a chipped old date stamp, a broken red crescent, and signs that one letter had been travelling through Lochdubh for far longer than anyone wished to admit. Chapter 1. The Letter in the Wrong Hand. Mrs. Wellington's electricity bill had been delivered to Angela Brodie, opened, read, and discussed outside the church before either woman understood what had happened. By lunchtime, Patel's shop was crowded with people pretending to need groceries. "I did not read all of it," Angela said. "You quoted the amount," replied Mrs. Wellington. "Mrs. Harris asked why you were waving an envelope." "I was indicating the address." "With some force," Archie McLean observed. Mrs. Wellington turned towards him. Archie began studying a packet of biscuits. Behind the counter, Mrs. Patel rearranged a display of cough sweets with growing severity. "The envelope entered the wrong delivery bundle," Effie Grant explained. "I sorted it according to the route slip." Effie ran the postal counter at the back of the shop. She was 23, careful by nature, and now painfully aware that everyone was watching her hands. "That proves the system is failing," said Mrs. Wellington. "It proves Effie's doing the work of 2 people in fewer paid hours," Mrs. Patel replied. Hamish Macbeth stood near the door, holding a loaf of bread he had bought 10 minutes earlier. Leaving had become socially impossible. The village had recently learned that the postal counter might lose its local sorting function. Officially, this was called a service review. Lochdubh understood it as the removal of something useful by people who would never have to live without it. 3 letters had already gone astray that week. One was Mrs. Wellington's bill, another was a medical appointment notice, opened by the wrong household and then discussed with disastrous concern. The third had not yet been explained. The shop door opened. A woman in a neat navy raincoat stepped inside, carrying a leather case and a small black notebook. "Beatrice Lawn," she announced. "Regional Service Compliance." Mrs. Patel gave her the polite smile she reserved for tax inspectors and people who complained about prices. "You are early. I prefer to arrive before difficulties have arranged themselves." Beatrice examined the opened bill, the villagers, and the cramped postal counter beyond the glass partition. "You have logged 3 delivery errors this week," she said to Effie. 3 that were reported. Meaning there may be more? Meaning people sometimes take a neighbour's letter round themselves. Beatrice wrote something down. Hamish saw Effie's shoulders tighten. "That might be called neighbourliness," he said. Beatrice turned to him. "And you are?" "Hamish Macbeth." "Local police. You are investigating the missed deliveries?" "I'm buying bread." Several villagers relaxed. Beatrice did not. "Misdelivered mail can expose medical, financial, or legal information. Informal handling may feel helpful, Constable, but it is still a breach of privacy." Before Hamish could answer, Alastair Muir entered, carrying an old envelope. Alastair was a quiet widower who lived above the shore road. The paper in his hand was yellowed and soft at the edges, covered with faded postal markings. "This came through my door this morning," he said. Mrs. Wellington leaned closer. "That is generally how letters arrive. It was posted 16 years ago." The shop fell silent. Beatrice held out her hand. "May I see it?" Alastair hesitated, then passed it over. His name was still visible beneath a torn return label. Across the back someone had written, "Found in unclaimed storage. Return to addressee." "Do you know the sender?" Beatrice asked. "My sister." "And where is she now?" "She died 15 years ago." His grief had grown old enough to speak quietly, but it remained grief. Nora Drummond, the retired sub-postmistress, tightened her grip on the bottle of furniture polish she had been carrying. "Have you opened it?" Hamish asked. "Not yet. I needed to sit down first." Beatrice studied the faded markings. I'll need this photograph for the audit. It belongs to me, Alastair said. The contents do. The envelope may show where the system failed. Nora spoke from beside the counter. There was a time when people could bring a private difficulty to the postmistress and expect discretion. And were all registered items recorded? Beatrice asked. Not every kindness requires paperwork. No, but registered mail does. For the first time, Beatrice seemed interested in something beyond the current mistakes. Alastair returned the letter to his coat and left without opening it. A moment later, Callum Strang backed through the doorway, pulling a trolley loaded with parcels. Callum was the contract courier and possessed the permanent expression of a man being blamed for delays created elsewhere. The trolley stopped. Luggs sat beneath the shop awning, directly in Callum's path. Move your dog, Macbeth. He doesna see the need. I've 18 parcels here, none addressed to him. Callum dragged the trolley around Luggs, muttering that even the animals received local privileges. Beatrice checked her notes. Your route sheets show 2 late handovers this month. My route sheets show your depot sent me out late. I'll need the logs. You auditors always arrive after the service has been cut and ask why it is struggling. Beatrice wrote that down as well. Callum looked as though he regretted not using stronger language. At the postal counter, Effie opened a drawer containing labels, rubber bands, a modern self-inking stamp, and an old brass date stamp with a dark wooden handle. We used that one for the last local postcards, she explained. It is not a farewell, Mrs. Wellington said. It is an acknowledgement. Of the sorting service ending? Beatrice asked. Of it being changed without good reason. Effie took out a souvenir postcard showing Lochdubh Harbour. The old stamp sticks on the number 4, she said. You have to press it hard. She adjusted the date wheel, inked the brass face, and struck the card. The date appeared in red. Beside the number 4 was a tiny broken crescent. Hamish leaned closer. What causes that? The rim is chipped, Effie said. It has been like that for years. Nora glanced at the mark. It was dropped during the Christmas rush. By whom? Asked Beatrice. No one admitted it. A few villagers laughed. Nora did not. Beatrice placed the postcard inside her folder. I'll require the current route sheets, the registered mail ledger, and any historic ledgers still kept here. Effie looked surprised. How far back? 15 years, at least. Nora's hand tightened around her teacup before she deliberately relaxed it. They will be covered in dust, she said. Dust does not make a record irrelevant. No, Nora replied softly. But sometimes it means a thing was best left undisturbed. She paid for her furniture polish and walked out into the rain. Hamish watched her cross the harbour road. Then he looked again at Beatrice's folder. The broken red crescent had vanished beneath its cover. It was only a flaw in an old tool, the sort of mark everyone in Lochdubh had stopped noticing. But Hamish had learned that familiar things were often the easiest things to misuse. Outside, the pillar box stood bright against the wet grey road. Inside it, letters waited in darkness, each carrying the quiet expectation that it would reach the person whose name was written upon it. Until that afternoon, no one in Lochdubh had thought of that expectation as trust. Chapter 2, A Counter Full of Ears. The meeting began at 7 in the back room of Patel's shop, where the walls were lined with spare shelves, Christmas stock, and boxes marked with dates no one wished to investigate. Mrs. Patel had placed 12 mismatched mugs on a folding table. By 7:30, 17 people had arrived. No one was invited, she observed. That is why everyone came, said Hamish. The gathering was officially intended to discuss the proposed reduction of postal services. Unofficially, Lochdubh wanted to inspect Beatrice Lawn before she decided its future. Beatrice sat at the end of the table with her audit folder open. She had removed her raincoat, revealing a grey suit of such tidy construction that Mrs. Wellington regarded it as a personal criticism. Effie Grant sat nearest the postal door. She had brushed her hair back into place, though one loose strand had already escaped. Nora Drummond arrived, carrying a cake tin. I thought people might need something with their tea. Mrs. Patel opened the tin. Inside was a plain fruit cake cut into exact squares. Very thoughtful, Nora took the chair opposite Beatrice. Callum Strang remained standing beside the shelves, arms folded. He had refused tea on the grounds that he would only be there 10 minutes. Hamish suspected that meant at least an hour. Beatrice began without ceremony. The purpose of this review is to determine whether local sorting remains operationally justified. It serves the village, said Mrs. Wellington. That is not the same question. It is exactly the question. Beatrice glanced at her notes. The present counter handles a declining volume of mail at a higher cost per item than the regional average. Archie McLean frowned. Does that include the letters sent from here, or the ones sent to here? Both. Then it is hardly our fault if people elsewhere do not write to us. A few people murmured agreement. Beatrice waited until the room quietened. There have also been recent handling errors. After Effie's hours were cut, said Mrs. Patel. Staffing is part of the review. Stuffing created the problem you are now using to justify less stuffing. Beatrice's expression suggested she had met this argument before and had never enjoyed it. The 3 recent errors cannot be ignored. Nessie Curry leaned towards Jessie. It was 3. I know. 1 was medical. I know that too. Beatrice looked towards them. Is there something you wish to add? Nessie sat straighter. We only know what people have said. Jessie nodded. And they have said quite a lot. Hamish lowered his face towards his tea. Beatrice turned back to Effie. Explain how the delivery bundles are prepared. Effie described the morning collection, the route slips, and the sorting shelves. Her voice was steady at first, but Blair arrived halfway through the explanation and disturbed everyone by opening the door too hard. What in God's name is this? He demanded. A meeting, said Hamish. I can see that. Blair removed his wet coat and shook it near the shelves, spraying several boxes. Mrs. Patel handed him a cloth. He stared at it. For the floor, she said. Blair dropped the coat over a chair instead. He had driven from Strathbane expecting a minor dispute and looked offended to find chairs arranged for it. I was told there had been interference with the post. 3 mistakes, Hamish said. Mistakes become theft when folk start opening things. Angela Brodie coloured. Mrs. Wellington drew breath, but Hamish spoke first. No one is suggesting theft. Not yet. Blair noticed Beatrice and changed his manner by a fraction. Inspector Blair, Strathbane CID. Beatrice Lorne, Regional Compliance. Aye. Headquarters wants this settled quietly. Mrs. Wellington looked at Hamish. Quietly means against us. It often does, Hamish murmured. Blair heard him. I'm warning you now, Macbeth. No village drama. If Lochdubh turns a postal review into another circus, I'll recommend you for the Inverness liaison desk myself. The room fell still. Hamish pictured fluorescent lighting, scheduled meetings, and polite people discussing community engagement. The image was more effective than a threat of violence. That would be a waste of a good desk, he said. Blair pointed at him. I mean it. Hamish's voice softened. I'm sure you do. The slight hiss in the words made Blair drop his hand. Beatrice closed one section of her folder. My audit concerns more than the recent errors. There are inconsistencies in the registered mail logs. Effie looked surprised. The current ledger? And earlier records. How much earlier? Hamish asked. 15 years. Nora stopped lifting her cup. It was a small hesitation. The tea touched the rim, but she did not drink. Beatrice continued. Several archived entries do not match the regional receipt numbers. One registered item was accepted here, but there is no corresponding delivery signature or return record. Callum unfolded his arms. What has that to do with the courier route now? Possibly nothing. Possibly it establishes a history of informal handling. Nora set down her cup. 15 years ago, the system was different. Registered delivery was still registered delivery. There were storms. Ferries failed. People collected mail for neighbours. And did someone collect this item? I would not remember every envelope. Beatrice watched her. I haven't told you it was an envelope. The room changed. Nora smiled faintly. What else would registered mail be? A packet. A document tube. A small parcel. In Lochdubh. Usually an envelope. The answer was reasonable. Nora had delivered it too quickly. Hamish looked down at his tea. Its surface trembled slightly as someone moved behind him. Blair had noticed nothing. He was questioning Effie about a missing sack label. "You were responsible for these? For attaching them?" "Yes. And one disappeared. It came loose. Labels do not come loose by themselves. They do when the adhesive is cheap." Blair raised his voice. "So now the equipment is to blame?" Effie's cheeks reddened. Around the table, several villagers studied their mugs. Public embarrassment had a peculiar power in Lochdubh. People disliked cruelty, but were often too polite to interrupt it. Hamish placed his cup down. "The label was found under the sorting bench." Blair turned. "When?" "This afternoon." "You did not tell me." "You hadn't asked." Effie looked at Hamish. He had not found any label, but she understood enough to remain silent. Blair swore and stepped towards the postal door. "I'll inspect the place myself." "It has been locked for the night," Mrs. Patel said. "I'm the police. So is Hamish. He has a key and knows how not to break things." A smile passed around the table and disappeared before Blair could identify its owners. Beatrice gathered her papers. "I will conduct an overnight examination of the sorting room. Miss Grant, I'll need the current ledger, all retained registered mail books, and access to the sacks awaiting collection." "Tonight?" Effie asked. "It will be quieter." Callum gave a short laugh. "That is what you wanted all along. A service starved of money, one frightened assistant, and an empty room to photograph for your report." "My report will reflect what I find." "You find what the office sends you to find." Beatrice stood. "And you are very certain what that will be." "I've seen services closed before. Perhaps they were closed because people resisted proper procedure until proper procedure became impossible." Callum's face darkened. "You wouldn't last a week on my route." "No," Beatrice said. "But I might complete the paperwork." He pushed away from the shelves. "I'm done here." As he passed Beatrice, his shoulder struck the back of her chair. It was not quite deliberate, and not quite accidental. Blair watched him leave with satisfaction. "There's your troublemaker." Hamish watched Nora instead. She had not touched the cake she had brought. While everyone's attention followed Callum, she reached for Beatrice's folder. Her fingers stopped before they touched it. She adjusted the sugar bowl instead. The gesture lasted only a second. Then she looked up and found Hamish watching her. "Your tea will be cold," she said. "Aye. Cold tea tells you nothing." "No," Hamish replied. "But sometimes the hand reaching for the cup does." Nora held his gaze, then smiled as though he had made a small joke. Outside, Callum's van started with difficulty. Its engine coughed twice before catching, and the sound travelled through the wet street. Beatrice asked Effie to unlock the postal counter. Behind them, Blair complained about wasting police time on old ledgers and village gossip. Hamish remained at the table. 15 years was a long time for a missing letter to remain important. It was also a long time for someone to hope it had been forgotten. Chapter 3. The Sorting Room at Dawn. At 6 the next morning, Mrs. Patel telephoned Hamish and said, "You should come to the shop." Her voice was controlled. That was what brought him out of bed quickly. Rain had washed the colour from Lochdubh. The harbour lay beneath a low grey sky, and water ran along the gutters towards the sea. Lugs followed Hamish as far as the police station gate, reconsidered the weather, and went back beneath the awning. Mrs. Patel waited beside the shop's rear entrance. She wore a cardigan over her nightclothes and held the door key in both hands. "I came early to put on the heating," she said. "The postal light was still burning." "Was the door locked?" "The outside door was. The sorting room door was not." Hamish entered ahead of her. The shop felt unfamiliar without customers. Shelves stood silent in the half-light, and the refrigerator motor hummed behind the grocery counter. Beyond the glass partition, the little postal gate hung open. Beatrice Lorne lay on the floor of the sorting room. There was no violence in the scene at first glance, only disorder. A wooden stool had fallen beside her. 2 mail sacks had slipped from their hooks, and envelopes lay scattered across the floor. Her audit folder rested near one hand. Hamish crouched without touching anything. "Did you go inside?" he asked. "Only to the doorway. I called her name." "And then?" "I telephoned you." Mrs. Patel looked at Beatrice's still face. She was not an easy woman, she said quietly. But she should not be lying there. Hamish stood. "No." He called Strathbane, then asked Mrs. Patel to wait in the front of the shop. Dr. Brodie arrived first. He examined Beatrice with grave efficiency before covering her on a clean postal cloth Mrs. Patel supplied. "She has been dead several hours," he said. "There is an injury near the back of the head. A fall might explain it." "Might?" "The position is awkward. I would prefer not to make promises before the pathologist has seen her." Hamish studied the room. The high window was closed. The rear door showed no sign of forced entry. Beatrice's leather case sat beneath the sorting bench, still containing her purse and identification. Her notebook was there too, but several pages had been torn from the centre. The old registered mail ledgers lay open on the table. One mail sack had been moved from its usual hook and placed beside the stool. Its cord had been loosened, though the seal remained intact. Blair arrived with 2 officers and enough noise to wake anyone who might still have been sleeping above the harbour road. He pushed into the room and stopped. "Accident," he said immediately. "Cluttered floor, unstable stool, woman working alone." Dr. Brodie gave Hamish a brief look. Blair pointed towards the fallen sacks. "This is what happens when folk insist on running official services out of a grocery shop." Mrs. Patel, standing beyond the partition, heard him. "This shop has stood longer than your investigation." Blair ignored her. "Who had access?" "Effie, Mrs. Patel, Callum Strang, and Nora Drummond," Hamish said. "Beatrice was given a key last night, and the courier threatened her in front of witnesses. He argued with her." Blair looked pleased by the distinction. "Same thing, once someone is dead." He crouched beside the audit folder. Before lifting it, he pulled on gloves with unnecessary force. "It's empty." Hamish looked closer. Inside were the souvenir postcard, several current route sheets, and a typed list of ledger numbers. The handwritten audit notes Beatrice had made during the meeting were gone. Blair's expression changed. "Not an accident, then?" "That was quick," Hamish said. "A dead auditor and missing evidence. What would you call it?" "Something worth looking at before naming." Blair ordered an officer to find Callum. Hamish moved around the edge of the room. A cup stood on the table beside the ledger. A thin skin had formed across the tea. There were 2 sugar grains on the saucer, though Beatrice had taken her tea without sugar at the meeting. Near the fallen audit folder, a white envelope projected from beneath one corner. Hamish bent down. It was addressed to Beatrice Lorne at the Lochdubh postal counter. There was no sender's name. The flap had not been sealed, and the envelope contained a single blank sheet folded twice. "What have you got?" Blair demanded. Hamish did not answer immediately. A red date mark had been stamped across the upper corner. The number showed the following day's date. Beside the 4 was a broken red crescent. Blair took the envelope from him. "What kind of foolishness is this?" "It was stamped tomorrow," Hamish said. "I can read. Beatrice died last night." "I know that too." "Then someone changed the wheels on the old stamp before using it." Blair looked towards the postal drawer. Effie arrived at that moment, breathless and pale. She had pulled a coat over her clothes and fastened it wrongly. Mrs. Patel stopped her before she reached the sorting room. "Beatrice is dead," she said gently. Effie's face emptied. Blair stepped through the gate, holding the envelope. "Where is the old brass stamp?" Effie stared at him. "In the drawer." An officer opened it. The new self-inking stamp lay beside the ink pads and labels. The space where the brass stamp had rested was empty. Effie covered her mouth. "I put it back yesterday." "Who saw you?" Blair asked. "I don't know." "Aye. That will be useful." Hamish's voice became very quiet. "Leave the girl alone until she has had a moment." Blair turned on him. "This is a murder enquiry, Macbeth, and frightening Effie will no make her remember faster." Their eyes met. Blair looked away first, pretending to examine the missing pages. Hamish returned his attention to the envelope. The date from tomorrow was intended to confuse the time of events. Yet the broken crescent made one fact clear. Whoever had prepared it knew the old stamp and knew exactly where to find it. Outside, word had begun to spread. 2 villagers stood across the road beneath one umbrella, watching the darkened shop. A third appeared at the harbour corner and slowed without admitting why. Lochdubh had gone to bed fearing the loss of its postal counter. It had awakened to find that someone had used the post itself to tell a lie. Chapter 4. Blair chooses the Courier. Callum Strang was brought to Strathbane before 9, though Blair called it an interview rather than an arrest. The distinction did not improve Callum's temper. Hamish found him in a small interview room with wet hair, muddy boots, and both hands flat on the table. Blair sat opposite, already wearing the satisfied look of a man who had found the answer before hearing the question. "You threatened Beatrice Lorne," Blair said. "I told her she had never driven my route. You struck her chair. My shoulder caught it. You were seen near Patel's shop after midnight. My van would not start." Blair leaned back. "A remarkable number of innocent men develop engine trouble beside crime scenes." Callum looked towards Hamish. "Is he always like this?" "Only when awake," Hamish said. Blair slapped a hand on the table. "This is not one of your village conversations. A woman is dead, her notes are missing, and you had access to the sorting room. So did others. But others did not quarrel with her in front of half Lochdubh." Callum's jaw tightened. She was going to recommend closure before she ever arrived. "Effie will lose hours. I'll have to collect sacks from Strathbane and drive them back over roads they already say cost too much. Then, in 6 months, they'll say the route is inefficient. That sounds like a motive." "It sounds like arithmetic." Blair pushed the tomorrow-dated envelope across the table inside its evidence sleeve. "Recognise that?" Callum examined it. "It is an envelope. The old date stamp was used to prepare it. You carry sacks in and out of that room every day." "I carry sacks. I do not play with stamps. You knew where it was kept. Everyone knew. They were selling postcards with it." Blair's face brightened, as though public knowledge had somehow become exclusive evidence. "And you returned to the shop after midnight." "I stopped in the lane." "For how long?" 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Long enough." "To kill her? Search through years of ledgers? Tear pages from her notebook? Prepare a false letter and tidy nothing?" Hamish glanced at Callum. The man was angry, but the question was sensible. "What time did the van fail?" Hamish asked. "About 12:20. "How do you know?" "I called the depot supervisor." Blair frowned. "You did not mention that. You did not ask. You were too busy telling me what I had done." Hamish took Callum's phone from the evidence tray and checked the call log. There was an outgoing call at 12:23 lasting 4 minutes. "What did the supervisor tell you?" Hamish asked. "To disconnect the battery, wait, and tighten the earth lead." "And did it work?" "Eventually." Blair snatched up the route sheet. "This places you at the shop lane after midnight, which is where we already know you were." "It also places him speaking to the depot," Hamish said. "He could have made the call after killing her." "Aye. But then he would need time to enter the shop, confront Beatrice, remove the audit notes, find the old stamp, change the wheels, ink it, prepare the envelope, place it beneath the folder, move the sacks, and return to the van." "Possible. Possible isna the same as likely." Blair's cheeks darkened. Callum leaned forward. "I never went inside." "Why was your route sheet lying in Beatrice's folder?" Blair asked. "Because she asked for it at the meeting. The current sheet was there. Last month's sheet was missing. I keep copies in the van. Convenient." "No? Required?" Blair stood so suddenly that his chair scraped the floor. "You think you're clever because Macbeth is here to soften everything. But angry men make stupid decisions." Callum rose too. "And lazy policemen make easy ones." For a moment, Hamish thought Blair might strike him. Instead, Blair ordered the constable outside the door to take Callum to a holding cell. "You have no grounds to keep him," Hamish said. "I have suspicion of murder. You have a quarrel, access shared by half the shop, and a van parked nearby. And missing notes, which have not been found on him." Blair stepped close enough for Hamish to smell tobacco and damp wool. "You want to stay in Lochdubh, Macbeth? And stop protecting every local fool who shouts loudly enough." Hamish's expression remained mild. I'm protecting your case from falling apart before lunch. Blair stared at him, then stalked out. The Strathbane canteen offered a pie whose crust resisted the knife and whose filling had the colour of office carpet. Blair ate it with the grim concentration of a man refusing to admit defeat. Hamish left his untouched. Back in Lochdubh, Mrs. Patel sat him at the small table behind the grocery counter and gave him a bowl of spiced lentil soup. She did not ask whether he wanted it. Callum did not kill her, she said. That is a firm conclusion. He is rude when innocent and louder when frightened. This morning he was frightened. He was also near the shop. So were several houses. Hamish broke bread into the soup. Did Beatrice eat or drink anything after the meeting? She had tea in the sorting room. Nora took it through. Hamish looked up. Nora? Effie offered. But Nora said the girl had enough to do. With sugar? Beatrice took none. Hamish remembered the grains on the saucer. Did Nora? 2 spoons. Always. Mrs. Patel watched him. Is that important? Perhaps only to the tea. She did not press him. It was one of the reasons Hamish trusted her. Effie entered from the postal counter, carrying a bundle of route sheets. I found the Courier timings, she said. Callum's collection scan registered at the harbour depot at 12:58. Hamish set down his spoon. The depot was 17 minutes from Lochdubh in good weather. Last night's rain would have made it longer. If he left the lane around 12:40, Effie said, he could just have reached it. He told us the van started after 10 or 15 minutes, Hamish replied. That gives him almost no time inside the shop, but not none. No. The theory remained possible, which Blair would consider sufficient. Yet it required Callum to do everything quickly and carefully while leaving the room untidy, then drive through rain fast enough to make his depot scan. Hamish disliked theories that demanded both panic and precision from the same person in the same 10 minutes. He walked out to the harbour road. The van's tyre marks were still faintly visible beside the shop lane. Callum had parked facing Strathbane, bonnet towards the road. A dark smear lay near the front wheel where someone had knelt in the wet grit. Across the lane, a curtain moved in the upper window of Mrs. Harris's cottage. Hamish knocked. Mrs. Harris opened the door wearing an apron and an expression of innocent surprise that took more effort than innocence usually did. I suppose this is about the Courier. What did ye see? Nothing worth repeating. That has never stopped anyone before. She hesitated. I heard him swearing at the van. Then I looked out. He had the bonnet up. For how long? Most of a quarter of an hour. Did he go into the shop? Not while I was watching. And were you watching all the time? Mrs. Harris drew herself up. I have better things to do than stand at windows. Hamish waited. Nearly all the time, she admitted. It was not enough to clear Callum completely. It was enough to make Blair's certainty look premature. As Hamish returned to Patel's shop, he saw Nora Drummond crossing the road with a covered dish in her hands. For Effie, she explained. The girl has had a shock. That is kind. One must look after people before distress makes them careless. The words were gentle. Her eyes were not. Hamish held the door for her. Behind the counter, Effie was sorting letters under the watch of 2 villagers who had no postal business at all. By noon, Lochdubh had already chosen Callum as the likely killer. He had a temper, a late-night alibi that sounded weak, and the unfortunate habit of looking guilty whenever Blair spoke to him. Sometimes, Hamish thought, a village did not choose the person who best fitted the evidence. It chose the person whose anger made everyone else feel safer. Chapter 5. Hamish posts trouble by mistake. By the following morning, the tomorrow-dated letter had become the one fact Hamish most wanted kept quiet. He stood behind the grocery counter while Mrs. Patel checked a delivery of tinned tomatoes. Do not mention the date stamp, he said. Not yet. I have mentioned nothing. I know. You are telling me because you trust me. Aye. And because you know everyone tells me everything. That too. Mrs. Patel inspected a dented tin. What do you wish to learn? Who already knows? She understood at once. Only the police, Dr. Brodie, Mrs. Patel and Effie had seen the envelope clearly. Blair had ordered his officers not to discuss it, which made Hamish expect the detail to reach Strathbane before breakfast. In Lochdubh, however, information moved differently. People rarely repeated a secret directly. They surrounded it with concern until it escaped. Mrs. Patel placed the damaged tin aside. "I will say nothing." "Good. Except that you asked me to say nothing." Hamish looked at her. "That would rather defeat the purpose. I was explaining why your plan will fail." It failed before noon. The first version came from Nessie Curry, who entered the shop and asked Effie whether she had ever known a letter to be posted on the wrong day. Jessie followed behind her. "Not the wrong day," she corrected. "A day that had not happened." Nessie considered this. "That is worse." Effie stopped sorting envelopes. "Who told you that?" "No one told us," Nessie said. "We heard," Jessie added. "From whom?" The sisters looked at one another. "Mrs. Harris heard a policeman say something outside the shop," Nessie replied. "He did not say tomorrow," said Jessie. "He said the date was wrong. But Mrs. Harris said his face suggested tomorrow. By lunchtime, the letter had been posted from the future by a dead woman. By 1 o'clock, it contained Beatrice's own warning that she was about to be murdered." At 1:30, Archie McLean reported that someone at the harbour believed the old brass stamp had once belonged to a postmaster who disappeared during the war. "He retired to Perth," Mrs. Patel said. "That is one account," Archie replied. Hamish stood near the postal gate and watched the gossip move through the shop. He had hoped the hidden detail would make someone careless. Instead, it made everyone inventive. Worse, attention settled on Effie. No one accused her. Lochdubh could be much more painful than that. Mrs. Wellington asked whether Effie was sleeping properly. Mrs. Harris brought her a jar of marmalade. 2 customers offered to check their own letters before leaving the counter, speaking in the slow, encouraging tones used with injured children. Effie endured it for an hour. Then an elderly man counted his change twice in front of her. "I can count," she said. The man blinked. "I never said you could not." "You counted it again." "I always count my change." "You have shopped here for 20 years. You have never counted it before." He left without the newspaper he had paid for. Effie turned towards Hamish. "You told people about the stamp." "I didna." "Then you told someone not to tell them." Hamish could not deny it. "I wanted to know who might react as though they already knew." "And did you?" "So far. I've learned Mrs. Harris can identify dates from a policeman's expression." Effie did not smile. "They think I changed it." "No one has said that. They are being kind to me." Hamish knew what she meant. Open suspicion could be argued with. Pity entered the room, sat beside you, and refused to explain itself. "I'm sorry," he said. Effie gathered a pile of envelopes and struck them sharply against the counter to straighten the edges. "I put the brass stamp back in the drawer." "I know I did." "I believe you." "That does not help if everyone believes you're only saying it because I'm local." She carried the envelopes into the sorting room. Hamish remained outside, feeling that he had made a mistake Blair would have recognised only after blaming someone else for it. Blair arrived shortly afterwards. He came through the door with rain on his coat and anger already prepared. "Have you lost your senses?" "Not recently. The whole village is talking about evidence from an active murder investigation. They talk about everything. They are calling it a ghost letter." "That part was not mine." Blair lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent the people beside the bread rack from hearing. "You have turned a straightforward case into folklore." "It was never straightforward. Callum was there. He quarrelled with her. He had access, and almost no time." "Enough time. Only if he killed her, searched the room, staged the letter, and repaired his van, while Mrs. Harris watched him through a curtain." Blair's eyes narrowed. "You have been interviewing witnesses without informing me." "I asked a neighbour what she saw from her own house." "You are meant to support the investigation." "I am supporting it. It keeps trying to fall over." Blair stepped closer. "One more village performance, Macbeth, and I will see you transferred somewhere your dog cannot interfere with official vehicles." The shop grew quiet. Hamish's expression stayed mild. "If ye spent half the effort checking the evidence that ye spend threatening my furniture arrangements, Callum might be home by now. Blair's face reddened. Before he could answer, Alastair Muir entered. He carried no groceries, and looked as if he had come after a long private argument. "Hamish," he said, "could I have a word?" Blair turned towards him. "If this concerns the murder, you speak to me." Alastair's resolve weakened visibly. "It concerns an old letter." Blair Seahill. "Macbeth has already made one letter ridiculous today. Try not to give him another." He pushed past Alastair and left the shop. The door closed hard behind him. Hamish led Alastair towards the quieter end of the counter. "Did ye open the letter from your sister?" "Aye. What did it say?" Alastair looked around. Mrs. Patel was serving a customer. The Curry sisters had moved towards the household goods, where they were pretending to compare dusters. Effie remained in the sorting room. "It was about the boathouse," Alastair said softly. "The old one, near the North Shore? My sister believed I had a legal share in it. She said papers were being sent separately by registered post." "And did those papers arrive?" "No." Alastair pressed his lips together. "I asked at the post office at the time. I was told nothing had come." "Who told you?" His gaze shifted past Hamish. Nora Drummond had entered without removing her rainhood. She stood near the doorway, holding a small parcel tied with string. For several seconds, no one spoke. Nora smiled at Alastair. "I heard your sister's letter finally arrived. That must have been a shock." Alastair's face closed. "It was a long time ago," he said. "Old grief can still be unkind." "Ah, yeah." Hamish waited. Alastair buttoned his coat. "It was nothing important after all. Ye were about to tell me who was at the counter when ye asked about the registered papers." "I do not remember." Nora placed her parcel on the counter. "Memory improves when people are upset, and worsens when they are questioned. It is one of its crueler habits." Alastair looked at her, then at Hamish. "I should go." He left before Hamish could stop him. Through the window, they watched him cross the wet road, shoulders bent against the rain. Nora removed her hood. "The poor man has been lonely too long. It makes old disappointments grow larger." "Perhaps," Hamish said, "you should not trouble him over a family matter. If the registered letter disappeared here, it is more than a family matter." Nora's expression remained composed. "Not every missing letter contains a crime." "No." Hamish looked towards the sorting-room drawer where the brass stamp had once been kept. "But someone thought this one worth hiding." For the first time, Nora did not answer him immediately. Behind them, the postal slot rattled as another envelope dropped into the shop. Everyone turned towards the sound. It was only the ordinary post arriving at its ordinary time. Yet no one in the room looked entirely reassured. Chapter 6. The Man Who Never Got His Letter. Alastair Muir's cottage stood above the shore road, where the wind reached it before reaching anything else. Hamish visited after lunch. The rain had weakened to a fine mist that blurred the line between sea and sky. Alastair opened the door only after Hamish knocked twice. "I told you it was nothing important." "Aye," Hamish said. "That is often what folks say when something has been important for 15 years. Alastair considered closing the door. Instead, he stepped aside. The cottage was warm and extremely tidy. A clock ticked above the fireplace. 2 cups stood upside down on a cloth beside the sink, though Alastair lived alone. On the mantel was a photograph of a younger Alastair beside a dark-haired woman holding a fishing rod. "My sister, Morag," he said, when he saw Hammy Continuesh looking. "She caught nothing that day, but complained so cheerfully we stayed until dark." He made tea and measured the leaves carefully. The old envelope lay on the table beside several papers. Hamish did not reach for it. What did Morag write? Alastair sat opposite him. "Our father owned the old boathouse beyond Dunan Point. Morag believed the title gave each of us a share. I had left Lochdubh by then. We had quarrelled before I went. About the boathouse? About everything. Families rarely keep their arguments tidy." Morag's letter had been written shortly before her death. She said a solicitor would send registered documents confirming Alastair's interest in the property. She wanted him to sign and return them before their cousin's family assumed control. "The legal letter never arrived," Alastair said. "I thought Morag had changed her mind. Then she died, and asking seemed greedy. So ye let it go." "I told myself I had." He looked towards the photograph. "People can become accustomed to an injury if they give it an ordinary name. I called it a family misunderstanding." Hamish glanced at the papers on the table. "What changed?" "A kayak company wants the boathouse. They plan to repair it, build a landing platform, and run summer tours." "Who controls it now?" "Nora's nephew, Ian Drummond. He has managed the place for years. The council records treat him as the practical owner, though the title was never properly settled." "Has he signed anything?" "Not yet. But there is money involved now." Alastair gave a dry, unhappy smile. "A ruin is a family burden until someone offers to buy it. Then it becomes heritage." Hamish picked up Morag's envelope. The faded postmark showed it had passed through several storage depots before being returned. Nothing on it explained why it had waited 16 years. "Did Beatrice know about the boathouse?" "I mentioned Morag's registered papers when she asked about the old envelope. She became interested at once. She said the regional log showed a registered item sent to me around the same time." "And the Lochdubh ledger?" "She did not say." Hamish thought of Beatrice asking for 15-year-old records, Nora's hand pausing above her tea, and the missing pages torn from the auditor's notebook. "You said ye asked at the post office after the papers failed to arrive." Alastair nodded. "I went in twice. The first time, Nora checked the shelf and said nothing was there. The second time, she said registered items sometimes returned to the sender when addresses were unclear." "Was your address unclear?" "No. I had returned to the same cottage." "Did she show ye the ledger?" "Why would she? Nora was the postmistress. People trusted her." The words carried no anger. That made them sadder. Alastair opened a small wooden box and removed folded receipts, old guarantees and documents tied with string. "I keep papers," he said, apologetically. "Morag used to say I could produce the receipt for a kettle after the kettle had rusted away." He sorted through the bundle and handed Hamish a narrow slip. It was a postal inquiry receipt. The paper had faded almost white, but Alastair's name and the date remained legible. Across the bottom was a red Lochdubh date mark. Hamish studied it. The number 4 was complete. There was no broken crescent beside it. "This was stamped before the brass stamp was chipped," he said. "I suppose so. It also proves ye made the inquiry here. Would anyone deny that?" "Perhaps not. But the regional office might claim the missing letter never reached Lochdubh." Hamish slipped the receipt into a clear evidence sleeve. "If their ledger number matches this date, the registered item came through the local counter. It didna vanish in Strathbane." Alastair looked towards the window. Below the cottage, the shore road curved past the harbour towards the dark shape of Dunan Point. "Do you think Nora kept it?" "I think Beatrice found something that frightened someone. Nora was kind to Morag. A person can be kind and still decide they know what is best for somebody else." Alastair rubbed one thumb across the edge of the table. "There was bad feeling then. Morag wanted the boathouse sold. Our cousin wanted it kept. Nora said papers and lawyers would turn the family against itself." "Did she say that before the letter went missing?" "Yeah." The room seemed quieter after that. Hamish finished his tea. "Why did ye stop speaking yesterday when Nora came into the shop?" Alastair did not answer immediately. "Because I saw her face when I mentioned the registered letter." "What did ye see?" "Fear." He looked ashamed of the word. "Then she spoke kindly, and I thought perhaps I had imagined it. Nora has always known how to make suspicion feel like bad manners." Hamish rose. At the door, Alastair said, "What will happen to the boathouse?" "That will be for solicitors." "That means years." "Probably." Alastair almost smiled. Morag would have hated that. Outside, the mist had lifted enough to reveal the old boathouse across the water. Its roof sagged at one end, but the stone walls remained solid. A bright planning notice had been fixed near the track, promising guided coastal adventures and sustainable tourism. Hamish stood for a moment, holding the old receipt. 15 years earlier, a single envelope had entered Lochdubh's postal system and failed to reach the man named upon it. Because it had not arrived, a quarrel had never happened, a claim had never been made, and control of the boathouse had passed quietly into other hands. Someone had called that silence kindness. Now the ruin was worth money. Beatrice Lorne was dead, and the silence had become valuable enough to protect. Chapter 7. The Courier Theory Tears. By afternoon, Blair's case against Callum had begun to develop the loose edges of an old envelope. The depot supervisor confirmed the midnight telephone call. Mrs. Harris admitted she had watched Callum struggle with the van for nearly 15 minutes, though she insisted she had not been spying. "I was checking the weather," she told Blair. "At midnight. The weather does not keep office hours." Another neighbour had heard the engine start shortly before Callum drove away. The harbour depot scan placed him there soon afterwards. None of it made his innocence certain, but it left very little time for murder, theft, and elaborate staging. Blair released him with a warning. Callum returned to Lochdubh looking more insulted than relieved. He entered Patel's shop, bought a packet of batteries he did not need, and placed the money on the counter with care. Mrs. Patel handed him his change. "You were overcharged yesterday," she said. "I was in custody yesterday." Then the overcharge was earlier. Callum looked at the coins, understood the apology, and put them into his pocket without comment. Hamish found Effie in the sorting room checking the stamp drawer for the third time. "It was here after the meeting," she said. "I stamped the postcard, wiped the face, and put it beside the red ink pad. Could Beatrice have taken it? She might have. But why would she hide it? To test whether anyone noticed?" Effie shook her head. She liked records. If she removed something, she would have written it down. That sounded true. Normal counterwork had continued using the modern self-inking stamp. Effie showed Hamish the day's outgoing letters. Each bore a clean black date, surrounded by the faint rectangular edge of the mechanism. "The old brass one was only for souvenir cards," she said. "It had not been used on ordinary post in months." Hamish took out the evidence photograph of the tomorrow-dated envelope. The red impression was darker along the lower edge and faint at the top. Beside the number 4 sat the broken crescent. "What surface did ye use beneath the souvenir postcard?" he asked. "The counter." "Always?" "Aye. The brass stamp needs a hard strike." Hamish examined the counter. Years of use had left the wood scratched and slightly uneven. The red ink pad beside it had a dark stain across one corner where the stamp had repeatedly touched the casing. Yet the envelope found beneath Beatrice's folder showed no trace of that stain. "Could someone have used another ink pad?" Hamish asked. "There is only one red pad here, unless they took the stamp elsewhere." Effie looked towards the open drawer. "You mean someone removed it before the murder, or after?" Hamish borrowed a plain envelope and asked Effie to use a spare brass parcel marker of similar weight. She struck it against the counter. The mark was sharp in the centre, with a slight double edge where the wood beneath dipped. Then they placed a stack of folded forms under a second envelope. This time the mark spread more evenly. The paper showed a deep pressure hollow around the stamped area. Hamish took out the photograph again. The tomorrow letter had the same hollow. "It was stamped on something softer," Effie said. "A blotter, perhaps? Or a table covered with folded paper? Not here. No." That mattered. The false letter had not been prepared in panic beside Beatrice's body. Someone had taken the old brass stamp away, changed the date wheel, and used it on a softer private surface before returning to the sorting room. Or perhaps had never returned the stamp at all. Blair arrived, while Hamish was comparing the impressions. "What are you doing now?" "Looking at the evidence." "I have officers for that. They missed the pressure marks." Blair examined the envelope photograph without enthusiasm. It was stamped. "Of course there are pressure marks. Not like these. The mark was made on a padded surface. No, the postal counter." "And what does that prove?" "That Callum couldn't simply have slipped inside, grabbed the stamp and prepared the letter here while his van was failing outside. He could have taken the stamp earlier. He could have. But so could anyone who attended the meeting." Blair's mouth tightened. "You are determined to clear him." "I'm determined no to arrest him," because he speaks to you in the manner you inspire." Before Blair could answer, a crash came from the shop yard. They found Sunsy beside an overturned crate. The cat had something red caught between his paws and was biting it with great concentration. Blair started. "If you tell me that animal has found another piece of evidence—" "It is a rubber band," Hamish said. Sunsy released it, then hooked it back with one claw. Effie picked it up. "It came from a mail bundle." "From the sorting room?" Blair asked. "Or any sack, trolley, or parcel that passed through the yard." Blair looked disappointed that it could not immediately be used against Callum. Hamish watched Sunsy disappear beneath the delivery van. The rubber band was not a clue. It was only a reminder that postal objects travelled. Stamps, labels, sacks and string passed between hands and rooms until their original place meant very little. But the tomorrow letter had not merely travelled. It had been carefully manufactured. Back inside, Hamish checked the old ledger again. One page carried a faint red smear near Alastair Muir's name. It was too blurred to identify as the broken crescent, and the date belonged to a period before the stamp had been damaged. Beatrice had marked the entry with pencil. Beside it, she had written 2 words: "No return." The missing registered letter had been accepted at Lochdubh. It had neither been delivered nor sent back. Someone had removed it from the proper route and allowed the records to close around the absence. Blair glanced at the note. "That does not tell us who killed her." "No," Hamish said. "But it tells us why she kept looking." Mrs. Patel appeared at the postal gate. "Nora Drummond has brought another cake." Blair frowned. "Why?" "She says people under strain should eat." Hamish closed the ledger. Nora had brought tea to Beatrice on the night she died. She had known where the old stamp was kept, had managed registered mail 15 years earlier, and believed some truths were better prevented from reaching their destination. None of those facts alone proved murder. Together, they suggested a conversation Hamish needed to have somewhere Nora felt safe enough to speak carelessly. He looked once more at the deep impression on the tomorrow-dated letter. A private table. A soft surface. Red ink pressed hard enough to leave its shape behind. "Come along, lugs," Hamish said as he left the shop. The dog followed him as far as Nora Drummond's gate. There he sat down and refused to go farther. Chapter 8. Nora's Drawer. Nora Drummond's cottage stood behind the kirk, protected from the harbour wind by a low stone wall and 2 carefully pruned rowan trees. Lugs accompanied Hamish as far as the gate. He looked at the white path, the polished brass knocker, and the curtains hanging in exact folds. Then he sat down. "Ye may be the sensible one," Hamish told him. Nora opened the door before he knocked. "I saw you coming." A useful skill in Lochdubh. It is difficult not to see people when they bring a large dog. She glanced towards Lugs, who had turned his back on the house. "He is welcome inside. He appears to have formed an opinion." Nora's kitchen was as orderly as the old postal counter had once been. Jars stood with their labels facing forward. Dishcloths hung squarely from the rail. Even the kettle seemed to boil without making unnecessary noise. She served tea in cups so thin Hamish feared his fingers might damage them. "You have come about Alasdair," she said. "And Beatrice." Nora placed a plate of shortbread between them. "I have told Blair everything I know." "That must have been trying. He is not a patient man." "No, neither was Beatrice." Hamish waited. Nora lifted her cup with both hands. She believed every difficulty could be corrected by producing the proper document. "Some difficulties are caused by documents, such as Alasdair's inheritance." Her eyes remained on the tea. "That was a family matter. It became a postal matter when his registered letter disappeared. We do not know that it disappeared here. The regional number matches the date on his inquiry receipt." It reached Lochdubh. For the first time, the cup trembled faintly against its saucer. Records from that period were not perfect. "But ye remember the letter?" Nora looked up. "You are putting words into my mouth. At the meeting, Beatrice said a registered item was missing. Ye called it an envelope before she described it. Most registered items were envelopes." "Aye. And ye knew Alasdair had expected one." "Everyone knew there had been a dispute over the boathouse." "Alasdair didna." "Not properly." Nora set down her cup. "Morag was ill. She was angry with half her family and frightened of the other half. She wrote letters whenever the mood took her. Some contradicted letters she had written the week before. That doesn't give anyone the right to choose which reached their address. I did not see it did, but ye believe it. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Nora turned towards the window. From the kitchen, the upper part of the kirk tower could be seen beyond the rowan branches. People speak as though truth were medicine, she said, as though it always heals if administered quickly enough. Often it only moves pain from one person to another. That may be so. Then you understand. I understand why a person might delay a truth. I do not understand why they should keep it for 15 years. Nora's expression tightened. The boathouse was worthless then. And now? That has nothing to do with me. Your nephew is negotiating with the kayak company. Ian has repaired the roof, paid the rates, and kept the track clear. Alastair did none of those things. He didn't know he owned a share. Nora's voice sharpened. He left. Other people remained and did the work. The words hung between them. There it was, not confession, but ownership. The quiet resentment beneath all her talk of protecting families. Hamish reached for a piece of shortbread. These are very good. Nora seemed disconcerted by the change. They are the same recipe I have always used. Mrs. Patel said ye brought tea to Beatrice on the night she died. I did. She took no sugar. I know. There were sugar grains on the saucer. Nora's hand paused beside the teapot. Perhaps Effie used the cup earlier. Perhaps. Hamish ate the shortbread slowly. Beatrice's missing notes have not been found. I cannot help you. Nor has the old brass stamp. I cannot help you with that either. A gust moved through the rowan branches. At the gate, lugs shifted position without looking towards the house. Hamish noticed a faint red mark beside Nora's right thumbnail. It might have been berry juice, sealing ink or paint. He did not mention it. Instead, he lifted Alastair's inquiry receipt from his pocket. The plastic sleeve had split along one edge. Have ye a little string? I should keep this closed until I get back to the station. Nora stared at the sleeve. What is it? The proof that his missing registered letter reached Lochdubh. She rose. There may be string in the dresser. The top drawer contained folded napkins. The second held candles, spare batteries, and old spectacle cases. Nora opened the third only a few inches before stopping. I must have moved it. Hamish had already seen the coils of brown string beneath a packet of Christmas seals, and beneath them, the corner of a dark blotter. I think it is there. I said, I must have moved it. Her voice was still controlled, but the room had become too small for its calm. Hamish stood. Nora. She kept one hand on the drawer. Do ye want Blair coming through every cupboard in the house? Her eyes flashed. You threaten very gently. I'm offering ye the chance to stop pretending. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Nora released the handle. Hamish opened the drawer fully. Beneath the string and faded Christmas seals lay a thick green blotter. One corner was stained red. Across its surface were several partial impressions from the brass date stamp. The crescent beside the number 4 appeared backwards. Hamish lifted the blotter by its clean edges. The tomorrow-dated letter had been stamped here, on this soft surface. The pressure had transferred the chipped mark through the paper and left its reversed shape behind. There were older impressions, too. Fragments of dates, registration numbers, and words pressed faintly into the surface. Near the centre, barely visible beneath a smear, were reversed letters. Muir. Nora sat down. Her face had lost its colour. You kept the old blotter, Hamish said. It was from the post office, and Alastair's registered envelope was pressed upon it. I kept many things when the counter was modernised, including the brass stamp. She did not answer. Hamish looked around the immaculate kitchen. Nothing had been left where it did not belong, except the truth that had been hidden in a drawer beneath decorations used to make ordinary letters look cheerful. Beatrice found the ledger entry, he said. She came here or confronted ye at the shop. Ye took the stamp and made the tomorrow letter to disturb the timeline. Nora's breathing became shallow. You cannot prove what happened in that room. Not from this alone. Relief moved too quickly across her face. Hamish placed the blotter inside the clean shopping bag he had brought for evidence. But the stamp, Beatrice's missing notes, and what the village remembers may prove the rest. The village remembers whatever it is last told. Aye, Hamish said. Which is why I intend to tell it carefully. Nora looked towards the kirk tower. I only wanted to prevent people tearing one another apart. And how has that worked? She closed her eyes. Hamish did not arrest her. Blair would need the blotter examined, the house searched properly, and the brass stamp found. More than that, Alasdair deserved to hear the truth somewhere it could not be softened into another private kindness. At the gate, lugs rose when Hamish appeared. He sniffed the evidence bag once, and walked towards the road. Behind them, Nora remained in her spotless kitchen, surrounded by all the things she had kept in their proper places. The village farewell tea was the following afternoon. Hamish now knew where the last delivery had to be made. Chapter 9. The last local post tea. The farewell tea took place the following afternoon because Mrs. Wellington said cancelling it would mean the authorities had taken the postal counter twice. No one called it a farewell. A handwritten sign above the grocery shelves announced, "The last local post, a continuation in reduced form." Archie McLean had suggested the wording. Nobody understood it, which made it sound official. The shop was crowded with sandwiches, shop cakes, damp coats, and people trying not to stare at Nora Drummond. She stood beside the memory table in a dark blue dress, composed enough to make Hamish wonder whether she still believed composure could alter evidence. The old postal equipment had been arranged for display. Brass scales, twine, obsolete labels, and a framed photograph of the counter from 20 years earlier. The space reserved for the old date stamp remained empty. Effie worked behind the glass partition. Her movements were careful, but she no longer looked frightened each time someone handed her an envelope. Callum stood near the door with his arms folded. "You did not have to come," Hamish said. "I was told there were free sandwiches." "There are. They are cucumber." "That may be why they are free." Across the room, Mrs. Patel was quietly replacing the cucumber plate with cheese rolls. Alasdair Muir entered alone. He acknowledged Nora with a slight nod and took a place beside the window. The old letter from Morag remained folded in his inside pocket. Blair arrived 10 minutes late, followed by McNabb and another Strathbane officer. "What is all this?" Blair demanded. "The postal tea," Hamish said. "There is an active murder inquiry." "Aye. That is why ye are here." Blair lowered his voice. "You said you had evidence against someone." "I do." "Then why have you assembled half the village?" "I didna. Mrs. Wellington did." Mrs. Wellington, passing with a tray, looked pleased to have her authority recognised. Blair glanced towards Callum. "If this is another attempt to excuse that courier, it is an attempt to stop ye arresting him twice for the same thing." Hamish moved to the front of the counter. Conversation faded slowly. Lochdubh did not fall silent all at once. It reduced itself through whispers until only the refrigerator motor and the rain against the windows remained. "I'll no keep ye from the tea long," Hamish said. "That depends on whether the cakes survive," Archie replied. Mrs. Patel looked at him, and he became quiet. "Beatrice Lorne came here to decide whether local sorting could continue. She also found a problem in an old registered mail ledger." Alasdair stared at the floor. 15 years ago, a legal letter addressed to Alasdair Muir reached Lochdubh. It was never delivered, never returned, and never properly recorded as missing." A murmur passed through the shop. Nora did not move. "That letter concerned a share in the old boathouse at Dunan Point. Without it, Alasdair believed his family had excluded him. The property remained under the control of others and is now worth rather more than it was then." Blair shifted impatiently. "That explains fraud. It does not explain murder." "I'm coming to that." Hamish lifted the souvenir postcard Beatrice had purchased on her first afternoon in Lochdubh. The old brass date stamp had a chipped number 4. When pressed hard, it left this broken red crescent. He held up the photograph of the envelope found beside Beatrice. The same mark appeared on a letter stamped with the following day's date. Someone wanted us to think the time of Beatrice's death was uncertain, or simply to create enough confusion for suspicion to settle on Callum, whose van was outside after midnight. Callum's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. The letter was not stamped on the postal counter. The pressure mark shows it was made on a softer surface. Hamish took the green blotter from an evidence bag. It was stamped, "In Nora Drummond's kitchen." Every face turned towards her. Nora looked at the blotter with an expression almost of disappointment, as though an old household object had behaved disloyally. Hamish continued. The broken crescent appears in reverse where the stamp pressed through the envelope. There are older impressions too, including part of Alastair's surname from the registered letter that never reached him. Blair stepped forward. "Where is the brass stamp?" Macnab opened a small box he had carried into the shop. Inside lay the missing stamp. "We found it wrapped in cloth beneath coal at the back of Mrs. Drummond's shed," he said. Nora closed her eyes briefly. Hamish looked at her. "Would you like to tell them?" For a moment, it seemed she might refuse. Then she removed her gloves and placed them neatly on the table. "Morag Muir was dying," she said. "She had quarrelled with Alastair and with the Drummond side of the family. The letter would have brought solicitors, accusations, and expense. The boathouse was falling apart. There was nothing worth dividing. It was not yours to decide," Alastair said. His voice was low. But Nora flinched. "No," she replied. "I told myself I was preventing a final quarrel. I thought you would remember your sister with affection instead of fighting over stone walls. You allowed me to think she had changed her mind about me." Nora's control weakened. "I did not foresee that. But ye knew," Hamish said. "When Alastair came asking for the registered letter, ye knew what the silence had made him believe." Nora looked towards the rain-dark window. "I had already done it. Returning the letter then would only have exposed everything. And later, when your nephew took control of the boathouse, Ian repaired it. He paid for it. Alasdair had left Lochdubh because he didna know he had a reason to remain," Mrs. Patel said. Nora turned towards her, hurt showing at last. "Everyone accepted my help. For years." "That does not make every choice yours," Mrs. Patel replied. Hamish let the silence settle. Beatrice compared the regional register with the local ledger. She found Alasdair's missing item and asked ye about it. Nora's shoulders dropped. She said she would report the matter. She spoke of criminal interference, property claims, compensation. She made it sound as though every kindness I had ever shown meant nothing. "So ye met her in the sorting room?" Hamish said. "I brought her tea. I asked her to wait until I could speak to Ian, and she refused. She said the report would be sent in the morning." Nora looked at the table rather than at the village. She turned away to put the ledger into her case. "I tried to take it." She pulled back. The stool went over. Alastair's face tightened. "She struck the edge of the sorting bench," Nora whispered. "I thought she would rise. But she didna. But she didna." "No. No one moved," Nora continued, her voice growing thinner. I panicked. I removed her notes. I took the old stamp and prepared the false letter at home. Callum had quarrelled with her. His van was outside. I thought the police would assume he had entered the shop. Blair's expression suggested this had been a reasonable expectation. "You went back into the sorting room?" Hamish asked. "Yes. The rear door had not caught properly when I left the first time. And the stamp? I hid it. You could have called for help after Beatrice fell." Nora looked at him. "I had spent 15 years protecting the first act. In that moment, I could think only of protecting it again." There was no triumph in Hamish's face. "That is the trouble with a secret kept for someone else's good. Eventually, the only person it protects is the one keeping it." Blair moved towards Nora. "Nora Drummond, I am arresting you on suspicion of murder and interference with the mail." Macnab stepped between them with quiet professionalism. "I'll handle it, sir." Nora took her coat from the hook. Before leaving, she turned towards Alasdair. "I did love Morag." "So did I," he said. "The letter was addressed to me." Macnab led her out into the rain. For several seconds, the shop remained silent. Then the kettle clicked off behind the grocery counter. Mrs. Patel began pouring tea. It was not avoidance. Some silences needed warmth before anyone could enter them. Callum reached for a sandwich. Mrs. Wellington stopped beside him. I may have formed an opinion too quickly. Aye. That is an apology. I know. Then you might acknowledge it. Callum lifted the sandwich. I am eating cucumber in public. That is acknowledgement enough. Effie laughed first. It was a small sound, but others followed not because anything was amusing, but because the room needed permission to become human again. Hamish looked towards Alastair. The old man stood beneath the sign, declaring the postal service would continue in reduced form. His sister's letter rested over his heart, delivered 16 years late and still carrying consequences no stamp could date. The truth had finally reached its address. Like much of the post in Lochdubh, it had arrived later than it should and caused more trouble than anyone had budgeted for. Chapter 10. The letter opened. The postal counter lost its local sorting function 3 weeks later. No one in Lochdubh described this as closure. Mrs. Wellington called it administrative surrender. Archie McLean called it centralisation, though he pronounced the word differently each time. Mrs. Patel simply moved the biscuit display so the reduced counter would still have room for 2 customers and 1 argument. Letters were now sorted in Strathbane and delivered back to Lochdubh in sealed grey trays. The new arrangement added miles, forms, and several opportunities for delay, but the counter remained open 4 afternoons a week. Effie kept her job. She had fewer hours than before, though more than the first proposal allowed. Beatrice Lorne's final report was never completed, and the regional office seemed uncomfortable closing the counter entirely while newspapers were asking questions about missing registered mail. On Effie's first afternoon under the new system, a queue formed before she unlocked the glass partition. Most of the customers needed nothing urgent. They bought stamps one at a time, asked questions whose answers were printed on the wall, and inspected their change with exaggerated care before remembering that this might appear insulting. Mrs. Harris brought a parcel addressed to her grandson. It contains a jumper, she told Effie. Nothing private. Effie weighed it. You do not need to tell me what is inside unless it is restricted. I am only making matters clear. You have written wool jumper across the box, so there can be no misunderstanding. Effie printed the label and handed her the receipt. Keep that safe. Mrs. Harris placed it solemnly in her purse, as if receiving a legal pardon. Callum Strang arrived with the afternoon trays. Someone had repaired the loose earth connection on his van and replaced the cracked battery terminal. He claimed not to know who had done it. Hamish suspected 3 people knew and would remain silent until their deaths. Callum placed the trays behind the counter. Anything for me? He asked. A circular about responsible driving, Effie said. Burn it. That would be interference with the mail. He looked at her, then laughed. Apologies had reached him in other forms. Scones appeared on his doorstep without a note. Mrs. Wellington stopped telling people he had a dangerous temper and began saying he was merely direct. Mrs. Patel charged him the old price for parcel tape, even after the price had risen. None of these gestures included the words, "We were wrong." In Lochdubh, words were sometimes considered unnecessarily showy. Alastair Muir's claim to the boathouse had entered the hands of solicitors. This pleased nobody. The original registered mail records, Morag's letter and the impressions on Nora's blotter supported his case, though ownership had become tangled through years of maintenance payments, informal agreements and assumptions repeated until they resembled facts. The kayak company withdrew its immediate offer but remained interested. They say they are willing to wait, Alastair told Hamish outside the shop. That is unusual in business. They expect the lawyers to exhaust us. Also usual in business. Alastair looked towards Doonan Point. The boathouse roof showed dark against the afternoon sky. I may never own enough of it to do anything. But now ye know Morag meant ye to have a share. Ye. He touched the inside pocket where he had once carried her letter. That matters more than I expected. Hamish understood. Property could be measured, divided and argued over. The knowledge that someone had not abandoned you was harder to price. Nora remained in custody while the authorities decided upon the exact charges. Beatrice's death had occurred during a struggle rather than a planned attack, but Nora's decision to remove evidence, manufacture the false letter, and redirect suspicion towards Callum left little room for mercy, disguised as misunderstanding. Her nephew Ian visited Alastair once. The conversation lasted 11 minutes and was conducted outside the cottage. No one knew what was said, though Nessie Curry reported that Ian left looking angry, while Jessie said he looked ashamed. Both descriptions might have been true. On the final Friday of the month, Effie placed the old brass date stamp inside the postal display cabinet. Macnab had returned it after the evidence, photographs and laboratory examinations were completed. Its wooden handle had been cleaned, but traces of red remained deep in the chipped metal rim. Effie wrote a card in careful block letters. Former Lochdubh date stamp. For display only. Not for postal use. Mrs. Wellington read it twice. You should add that it served the village faithfully. It was used to fake evidence, Effie said. Only once. That we know of, said Archie. Everyone looked towards him. He put down the postcard he had been examining. A poor choice of remark. Effie took one of the remaining last local postcards from beneath the counter. The picture showed the harbour under an unreal blue sky. Instead of using the brass stamp, she pressed the modern self-inking stamp into the corner. It made a clean black date. No crescent, no hesitation, no tomorrow. She handed the card to Alastair. For Morag, she said. He looked at the picture for a long moment. She would have complained that the hills are the wrong colour. Then it is accurate in spirit, Hamish said. Alastair smiled and slipped the card inside his coat. That evening, Hamish walked back towards the police station beneath a thin, persistent rain. The red pillar box near the harbour road shone under the street lamp. Water gathered along its curved top and dropped steadily onto the pavement. Lugs waited beneath the station awning, dry and entirely unashamed of having abandoned Hamish to the weather. You might have come to meet me, Hamish said. The dog stretched, then turned towards the door. Sunsea was nowhere in sight. Hamish suspected the cat had business beyond the limits of official understanding. Inside the station, the kettle took its time boiling. Hamish opened the post that had accumulated on his desk. 2 circulars, a fuel bill, a police memorandum, and a postcard from Priscilla in France. The picture showed a bright market square. Her message was friendly, brief, and careful enough to reveal very little. He read it twice, then placed it beside the kettle. Outside, a van passed along the harbour road carrying Lochdubh's outgoing mail towards Strathbane. It would travel farther than it once had, be handled by strangers, and perhaps return a day later than necessary. Yet each envelope still carried a name. That was the part no system should forget. For a time, the people of Lochdubh became slower to decide that another person's truth was dangerous, inconvenient, or better left unopened. They did not become perfect. Missus. Harris still noticed unfamiliar handwriting, and the Curry sisters could identify a private letter by the way its recipient hid it. But envelopes were handed over more carefully, and when someone said, "Perhaps they are better not knowing," there was usually a pause before anyone agreed. Lochdubh lost part of its old postal service, but it did not lose the memory of what had happened behind the counter. For a while, letters were handled more gently. People remembered that an envelope may carry money, grief, forgiveness, or simply proof that someone had not forgotten you. The old brass stamp had been made to certify a date. Its chipped crescent proved something different. Time can be altered on paper, but human hands rarely change it without leaving a mark. Privacy can be a kindness when it protects the person who owns the truth. When it protects the person hiding it, privacy becomes only a locked drawer with a polite label. That night, the kettle boiled in the police station. The reduced postal counter remained open, and the rain made the red pillar box shine like a small, stubborn heart. Lugs slept through the future of local services, while Sunsea kept his own correspondence with the darkness. If a letter could hurt someone, would you still deliver it, or would you decide that silence was kinder? Thank you for returning to Lochdubh. And when the village blames the Courier with the temper, Hamish follows a broken red crescent to the hand that kept too many secrets.